So I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you this evening. Appreciate elders asking me to do this. This evening, I'm going to be studying or looking at something concerning science in the Bible. And it's kind of, in this day and time, concerns me a lot of what people are putting out, professional scientists and other people that believe that kind of stuff, and even people that believe the Bible. A lot of times on the creation, things like that, they tend to think that Genesis 1 and 2 is not literal, or it's figurative language, that sort of thing. And so in my studies, though, I went back to some stuff John Clark, I guess Brother White mentioned a week or so ago about him being here some 30 years ago and talking through a series, or going through a series. I think on Sunday he did not teach on evolution, but the other 5 days I believe he did. And if I remember correctly, it was about 2 hours each night that he preached on, or taught on that. And back then he didn't have the PowerPoint, he had view graphs. And I remember he'd bring a stack about this tall each night, and he would just throw them down as he went through. And I don't know how much it cost to get them all shipped down here, because he went through a lot of them, but it was a very informative thing. And when I was looking at this subject, I went back and actually found something on the internet. I guess Brother Clark's been dead over 10 years now, and he had Alzheimer's for about 10 years before that. And so he was, it's been, over 20 years probably since he preached much himself. So the video that I found, and I'm sure you could find it on the internet too, and he goes into a lot more depth on some stuff than, if you want to study about evolution, or if you think your kids or grandkids or whatever might, be faced with something, I would recommend, because he did a really good job when he was here, and even except for the video being a little dated, I guess he did a really good job on that. So, but, and also I'll give Brother Hall some credit. He had a radio program several months ago where I got some information concerning some of the stuff that I'll present this evening, as well as I've read pretty widely about what men say about the subject, and there's a movement of people that would be considered, Bible followers, not Christians per se, as we would know it, but there are a lot of science people that deal with this subject, and so it's pretty interesting to go through that. But I'm going to start out here in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. It says, "And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring in certain of the children of Israel, even of the seed royal, and of the nobles' youths, in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, and endued with knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability to stand in the king's palace, and that he should teach them the learning and tongues of the Chaldeans." So this is a place where we find the word science in the Bible. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 20 says, "O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called." This word science here is not the word that we're going to be talking about tonight, so you really don't find the terminology. You certainly find a lot of the information that we'll study about tonight in the scriptures, but as far as the word itself, this is a little different word The original word, I guess, was gnosis, and Mr. Vine says that science in the King James Version is rendered knowledge, in the American Standard Version, New King James Version, etc. And he went on to say that science in the modern sense of the word is unknown in the scriptures. It's interesting that previously, not necessarily that far back, but in past centuries, science was called natural philosophy. And it's an archaic term, but I'd heard it in some of the studying that I've done on some stuff concerning science. And so it has to do with natural science and especially physical science. But that term philosophy there, kind of catches your eye. Philosophy, of course, is the study of creation of theories about basic things such as the nature of existence, knowledge, and thought about how people should live. And of course, most of us would know that when this kind of subject has been talked about, sometimes people that are pushing these theories, I was listening just a few months ago to a fellow that, and I think I'll talk about this later, in a church, but this fellow that was an advocate of evolution, and he said, he admitted right off before Charles Darwin that a lot of people believe that life could just spring out of inorganic material, just like on the side of the road or whatever, that things could just get started that way. And then when Darwin came along, I guess that's kind of what everybody latched onto, is what he was promoting. But the thing that I wanted to point out here is, interestingly enough, that, science as a subject, as a study, as a profession, is a lot about, theories and that kind of stuff. And this fellow was saying, that I was talking about, he was saying that evolution, as we know it, is a theory, but he was saying that it, was true. And I think a lot of science people would, do feel that way. A lot of people have used evolution and things like that to prop up their atheistic beliefs and different things. So the Bible and science. So due to the nature of this subject and some prominent advocates of science as being superior, people talk about, the Bible being unreliable and that the science is reliable. And a lot of it is just a bunch of theories that have been put together. And I've put a lot of work into it, but that doesn't mean that it's true. But anyhow, so we will be noticing both Scripture and other scientists. So these are some of the people, or some views of other people that do not believe in what these evolutionists and those kind of people. Because this kind of dogmatism is a real threat in our world today, and especially in the halls of education. I can think back to 40-something years ago when I finished my formal education. Well, I guess it's ongoing, but as far as classroom training, that's where it ended. But, very little threat from this kind of teaching did I come across in all of my years, but yet it's really being pushed, and that educational community is a great bastion for this kind of stuff. So as I talk about, people's views, scientists that would disagree with some of this, of course, from the Christian perspective, we know that the Bible is true. But sometimes I think about, a child being put into a situation in a classroom or with a professor or something, and they could be made to doubt, possibly. And so the reason that I'm kind of pushing or putting out there what other people think, what other scientists think about some of this, is because I do want you to know, or, the people that you would educate, that, it's not a consensus among the scientific community, this kind of stuff. So we need to think on these things because this is one way that the devil seeks to gain an advantage in our world. Any one of us could be affected, but us older people tend not to be affected about it as much. But younger people, sometimes their minds and their thinking has not been set as deeply, and they can be thrown a curve by this kind of thing. In Exodus 20 and verse 11, it says, "For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Sometimes people will quibble about, Genesis 1 and 2 and, about whether or not that was an actual 6 days or whatnot. But, when you think about the fact that we're not talking about a natural event here that happened at creation, we're talking about a supernatural event, right? Of God doing this miracle of creating the worlds as we know it. And so, whether he did it in 6 days or, 6 years, it would be fantastic. But he has set down here exactly how long it took him to do that, 6 days. In Psalm chapter 33, verses 6 through 9, it says, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, by the breath of his mouth all their host. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap. He puts the deeps in the storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm." So the truth that the world was created in 6 days is in contradiction with what a lot of people push, science people especially, that the earth and the world is billions of years old. Further scriptures that we need to consider in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3, it says, "By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible." This whole idea of God speaking and the world coming into being, that I didn't get that for a long time. It's been a few years ago since I did get it, but just the fact that he spoke and it happened, that's pretty powerful there. And the fact in this verse, it says, "Things seen were not made of things that are visible." So he didn't take other things and make things. We've got these laws of science about, not being able to destroy materials. When you burn something up, it's still there. It just changes phases, right? But when God created things, there was nothing that he created it from. He just spoke and it came into being. In Acts chapter 17, 24 through 29, it says, "God who made the world and everything in it, since he is the Lord of heaven and earth." Then in John 1 and verse 3, it says, "All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made." So all of these verses are giving God the credit for having brought the world into being. In Psalm 8, verses 3 through 9, it starts out saying, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. So, these are things that men have been considering, just looking at the heavens. I mean, you can be mesmerized just by, if you live out in an area where the city lights are not affecting you, just be mesmerized by what's going on at night up in the heavens. From Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we can draw an analogy from Adam and Eve. I've told this to other people. Perhaps I don't do a very good job of it, but this kind of really sticks with me. But Adam, obviously, and Eve, of course, was obviously created not as an infant, but as a mature adult. So after that first week, he was like some of us. He was a mature adult, obviously. If the earth was created mature, which I assume it was, what is its apparent age now? So understand, we're not saying that it is millions of years old, but that it could appear like that based on its maturity at creation. That's a possibility. In the industry that I worked in, one of the things they did to test materials was use heat. And they could use heat to age things and determine how long it would last. They'd have like test articles, and they would heat it up, and when they heated it up and did whatever they did to it, then they could determine how long that would last. And if men can be smart enough to do that, when God was creating the heavens and the earth, that he could have created it in any way he wanted to. So why would God do such a thing? There was a fellow that I worked with one time. He actually had been brought up in a liberal church, and he had gone off into all kind of religious error, not related to the Bible at all. But when I talked to him about the fact, the oil reserves and all that, or he talked to me about it, whatever it was back then, and I suggested the fact that, God could have put that there to begin with, and I assume he did. He said, well, why would God try to fool us like that? In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, this is not talking directly about this, but around this, it says, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And then as we back up in that chapter, verses 19 through 21, it says, for it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of the world through wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. So he was primarily talking about, preaching the gospel, that sort of thing here. But we know that he uses things, that people that want to be fooled can stumble on. Also in Genesis 1 and 2, I think has answers to most of the visible challenges from both physical science. That's the two predominant, maybe only predominant things as far as science, physical science, and you have life science. The Big Bang theory of how the world was created, and then from life science, evolution. The Big Bang theory in about 1929, Edwin Hubble discovered the universe is expanding, and scientists use this information to, kind of think about going backwards in time and extrapolate to come up with how long they thought the world, if it had all been together at one point, and had this Big Bang, how long that would take. would have taken, and that's kind of how they came up, apparently, with how long they felt like the world had been here, and to determine that time frame. There's a problem, or several problems with this. Of course, we'll talk about one here. Of course, one is the evidence from the scripture that, and the most predominant one for us, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and earth. We've already talked about that. But then also, this is enough for us, but this theory, the Big Bang Theory, is in conflict with proven scientific laws like entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy, as defined by Farnham Street, left unchecked disorder increases over time. So if you just think about the fact that if all the mass in the whole universe was together, and you have this big, what we'll call explosion, if you've ever seen an explosion in space, I mean, things just kind of keep drifting and drifting. And so that's, you do have that drifting of the universe, but you don't, even with time, you don't create the kind of order that you've got with the planets and the solar systems and all that sort of thing that you have today. So, so that's just kind of telling what I just said. But to go from our world today, order after the explosion would obviously have had to increase, not just decrease, entropy. So it violates this entropy law that, when I was actually in school at Auburn, there was a fellow that taught thermodynamics, and he said in our class, I remember, that was one of the reasons he did not believe evolution, is because he understood this law that, that was something that was kind of part of his expertise. Science, to be proven, has to be repeatable, and we can't repeat the beginning of the world, so we really don't know anything except as God has revealed to us. So that's, in so many words, something that Brother Clark had said in some of his work. And from a mathematical standpoint, I guess you could say the world itself shows evidence of an intelligent designer. What is the likelihood that the Earth, under the scenario of the Big Bang, would wind up in an orbit around the sun that would produce a habitat, temperatures for human existence that has all the things that we need to survive: water, oxygen, the temperature that we're in, that band. Sometimes they talk about the area that we exist in as the Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold kind of a scenario. So we're put in the perfect situation, and chance statistically would not have made that happen. So it's improbable that happened without intelligent designer. A lot of these science people, this term here, intelligent designer, let me go on just a second. So one of the things, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. So we can see that from all that God has done and how all that's put together. But intelligent design is this own study of science where people are looking, these scientists are looking at reasons why they don't think that evolution and these Big Bang theories and stuff like that, not from a biblical standpoint, but just from a science standpoint, they don't think that it really has credibility. A deist, is a person that believes in a God. They believe that there is, a creator of the universe, that sort of thing, but they don't take any active part in Bible study or anything like that. So they're not trying to prove the Bible, but yet these people can see from what they see around them, and they can understand that, there had to be a creator for us to get what we have. Science was first revealed in the Bible, not the words, of course, I showed you that. But in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22, says, God is enthroned above the circle of the earth. So many years after this was written, it was before man came up with the concept of a spherical earth. There's stories just a few hundred years ago of people still thinking that the earth was flat and that sort of thing. In Job chapter 27, 26 and verse 7, it says, he hangs the earth on nothing. And it's only been, a few centuries ago before gravity came about and it didn't come about, but we discovered that that's how things were staying in place, was by the gravitational forces, even though we still don't have a good explanation of gravity. We still know that. In Jeremiah chapter 33 and verse 22 says, as the host of heaven cannot be numbered, as we have expanded our space telescopes and other kind of telescopes, just it keeps confirming that, we've just got all these heavenly bodies out there. I'm talking about the second heaven, of course, the one where the planets and where the stars exist. In 2 Samuel chapter 22 and verse 16, it talks about the channels of the sea. Centuries after this was written, humans have used this knowledge to map out these channels. In Job chapter 38 and verse 16, it talks about the springs of the sea. And we know that people have encountered geysers under the sea. In Job 36, verses 27 through 28, says, for he draws up drops of water which distill as rain on the mist, which the clouds drop down and pour abundantly on man. So this draws a graphic visualization for us of the water cycle. To me, that's, as I read through that this afternoon, I thought that's just such a beautiful wording of how that works. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 6, the wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. So this sounds a lot like what we call the jet stream in our modern world. We want to turn now toward more of the general theory of evolution and the special theory of evolution. So Brother Clark, when he was here, I remember him talking about this, and when you look up stuff on it, you don't really hear so much about this special theory of evolution. But he's got some really good points concerning that, and he had studied it a lot. But he said that 90% of the issue of evolution are answered if you just understand this principle of, general evolution and then the special theory of evolution. The special theory of evolution states that many living animals can be observed over the course of time to undergo changes. So that is true, that animals do change, humans do change, obviously. But the general theory of evolution, all living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. And of course, that's false. He talked about when he was here about these experiments with fruit flies, where you can turn around a generation of fruit flies in a very short period of time. And so if you go over a long period of time, you would expect that if you were going to get something produced from a fruit fly, like a bug or something we'd never seen, you would have seen that, but that really doesn't happen. So evolution has a more impossible task in proving how an initial life form started. Life does not naturally come from non-life. I believe Brother Hall a couple of years ago had talked about this whole thing with somebody had talked about the difficulty that science has with producing life out of that primordial soup. And now they've come up with something they call a hydrothermal vent, which, the whole thing there is, water supports life, heat, supports life, but it does not produce life, okay? You still have to have life to create life. Richard Dawkins is one of the most famous evolutionists that around. He's getting pretty old now. He has a title that's called Darwin's Rottweiler, as opposed to a previous fellow who was Darwin's Bulldog. But he's such a staunch evolutionist. But when I read one of his books, and in reading his book, or listened to it actually, but anyhow, in going through that book, I was walking and I was listening, and he talked about, and they're looking at the possibility that life, that what we've got today kind of come through evolution. He said that the chance of that happening, and he was optimistic about this, was 30-something%. 30-something%. This is coming from a staunch advocate, okay? So let's think about that and how much confidence we would have if somebody told you if you wanted to get on Reuben's spaceship and you wanted to go up into space, and he said, I'll give you a 30% chance of surviving. Would you hop on that? Yeah. And so that's the point. Would you jeopardize your soul? Would anybody jeopardize their soul for something that the staunchest advocate is saying there's a 30% or 30-something% chance that this happened this way? Dawkins, to be complete, believes there is zero chance that the biblical creation could happen. Now, Dawkins is looking at it from a natural perspective, right? The world, the way it works today. So, but it did not happen naturally, right? It happened miraculously. God created things in a way that just does not happen today. So is the miracle of creation. So evolution as a fact, talking about the special theory and the general theory, Brother Clark, this is his statement here, is a partial truth. And it's a partial truth because it's right that the special theory or special evolution, where there are changes among people, among animals, but you don't have something else being created from, say, a monkey. Like apparently Darwin says in one of his books that humans came from monkeys. So if you're carried away in sin, and you'll likely find refuge in, some of these philosophies, because people, when they turn away from God, they like to think in terms of not being condemned. And so they cling on to things like this. You know, sometimes people are all caught up by sin and they latch on to ideas that help them to eliminate their guilty feelings. You know, that's going to happen. But in our study, we're trying to think about young people and them not getting blindsided by some of this. So, you know, again, you know, if you think your child or you know of somebody that might be caught up in this, it might be worth your time to sit down with them and go through, you know, one of Brother Clark's online expositions, I guess. So again, the peer pressure, you know, the pressure that you have from sometimes from faculty, that whole crucible of you know, pressure. You know, if a child has not been exposed to this, if his foundation, he or she's foundation is not in the right place, you know, they can be made to doubt. And we need to be making sure that we're trying to prevent that from happening. So hopefully we have gone over a few things that might be of interest. Again, I did not try to go into great depth on this because we would have been here a lot longer, and I'm not sure I'm actually the guy to do that, but I just would like for us to be thinking about it because of, you know, the threat, especially kids that are in public schools and things like that, or even people that might be young that's working in an environment, you know, where this kind of thing might be pushed. But if there's anyone here this evening who has a need to respond to the invitation in any way, we'd like to encourage you to do that. If you're an Alien Center and you know what you need to do to become a Christian, we'd like to encourage you to do that at this time. Or if you, you know, are a Christian